The bagpipe is undoubtedly one of the oldest forms of music in the world. And although today it is principally associated with the Highlands of Scotland, at one time the pipe was played in every country in Europe. And in fact today the bagpipe is still to be found in the remote country districts of all the various countries of Europe. In Scotland the bagpipe lasted a lot longer and developed to a much higher stage, principally because of two things. For one thing, the instrument is principally an open-air instrument, and when it's compared with a piano or a violin indoors, it normally comes off second best. But in its own field, it is quite undoubtedly supreme. And the culture and general conduct of people's lives was continued longer in the open air in the Highlands of Scotland than probably anywhere else in Europe. And for that reason, the bagpipe became very popular there. The second reason for the intensive development of the instrument was the advent of a family called MacCrimmon, who appeared in Scotland. We don't know really where they came from, but they appeared about 1500 AD. And from that time onwards, they developed a type of music which we call Piobaireachd, or Ceolmore, big music, which is the classical form of music of the bagpipes. Just while we are on the historical side of the story, I'd like to have played here an instrument which is about 300 years old and is therefore the kind of instrument which these early MacCrimmons would play. As distinct from the instrument we use today, it has only two tenor drones and no bass drone, but otherwise it's very much the same. The tune which is going to be played is the start of one of our best pieces of Ceolmore or Piobaireachd, called The Lament for the Children, composed by Patrick Moore MacCrimmon to commemorate the death of 7 of his sons in an epidemic of smallpox in Skye. Here then is the groundwork of The Lament for the Children. All bagpipe music is divided up into three main classes. The first is called Ceolmore, which is the Gaelic for big music, such as you have heard, or at least that was a little bit of Ceolmore you've heard. The second is called Ceolmeanach, middle music, which is made up of slow airs and jigs. The jigs were looked on with considerable favour in the olden days, principally as a means of exercising the fingers. And the third class of music is Ceolpec, or the little music, which is composed of marches, strathspeys and reels, the kind of bagpipe music which is normally played by pipe bands and normally in fact played by most pipers today. The Ceolmore or Piobaireachd, and Piobaireachd incidentally is just a Gaelic word meaning piping, and was used to describe ceol mór at the time when nearly all piping consisted of this classical form of music. The ceol mór or pibroch, then, is the chiefly interesting branch of our music because it has the greatest musical quality. Present-day composers in Scotland, incidentally, during this renaissance of Scottish culture that's going on, are finding considerable inspiration and quite a number of themes for their own compositions from this old type of music. It's something like a symphony in composition. It consists of an urlar or ground, which is a simple presentation of the melody notes on the bagpipe, and it's followed by a number of variations which increase in complexity as the piece progresses. It reaches a climax in a movement called the crownlua or a crownlua mach, and at this stage the piper's fingers are probably just moving as quickly as it's possible for him to make them. And then, instead of stopping there the way the normal symphonic arrangement would stop, the Celtic symphony goes back to where it started, and you hear once more the groundwork, the presentation of this theme. This is rather typical of all Celtic artwork, because in the illuminations of pages, such as in the Book of Kells, you find that the artist has chosen himself a framework within which he's got to work, and he elaborates this to the utmost by putting in all sorts of details of interlacing figures and so on until the complete framework is filled in. And the same thing happens with the sculpture work of old crosses and so on, and the same thing happens in our pibroch. We play as much as we can onto the basic notes until there's nothing left to be done, and then we go back to the beginning. This is also similar to the serpent motif in artwork, where the serpent is always shown twisting itself around and finishing with its tail in its mouth. This is supposed to represent the Celtic symbol for infinity, the never-ending line. Well, pibroch can consist of laments, salutes, gatherings, or descriptive pieces, although most of them are laments, and most people think that all of them are laments. They're played fairly slowly, and for that reason they seem at first hearing to be all fairly of the lament character. But they probably are played more slowly than they ought to be. We're not too sure about this, and the descriptive pieces in particular can be played fairly quickly without any loss in the beauty of them. The development of pibroch is, of course, very obscure. It may be that in the early days the piper was called upon to play a characteristic series of notes, a little simple tune to rally the clan in battle, something as happens even in present days, although maybe not so much in this last war as in the First World War. The piper would stand at some fairly safe distance, I suppose, and play this melody over and over again, and if the chief shifted his standard or his position in field, the piper followed, and the clansmen knew where they had to rally. Well, no piper, of course, could play this for a long time on end without getting rather wearied of it, and it may be that pibroch developed in the way that he then started to put variations on it, just so that he maintained the same theme throughout, but gave himself a little more interest in the playing. We know that we are greatly indebted to the MacCrimmon family, of course, in their 300 years of teaching and composing in Scotland, because they developed piping from this rudimentary hard gathering stage to a very high art form, as you'll hear in one moment. The trouble in listening to pibroch for the non-piper is that we can't vary the intensity of the sound at any time, and therefore the rhythm is rather more difficult to follow. The framework of the chanter, of course, is limited to 9 notes, an octave and 1 note, and this would tend to restrict us further, but it doesn't really, because the old composers made use rather of pentatonic scales than of the normal full diatonic range. And you'll find that many tunes are played restricting themselves to 5 or 6 notes. The melodies tend to be rather beautiful. In fact, the principal part about the interest of them probably is the beauty of the melody, because our harmony, being supplied by 3 drones, is fixed and unalterable throughout the tune, and therefore the composers had to concentrate almost entirely upon melody and upon elaboration of technique, and were not led astray by such considerations as counterpoint and variation of harmony. The piece which John MacLellan will play now is called MacCrimmon's Sweetheart, and is representative of the first stage of piping, the time when piping and pibroch consisted of rather difficult stuff to express, rather hard, repetitive style of composition, a little stage removed from the early gatherings, of which we still have many examples, but still not reaching the what we consider the golden age of the piping. This stage, incidentally, lasted till probably about 1500 when the MacCrimmons appeared on the stage, although this pibroch itself is a MacCrimmon composition. The Sweetheart in the title does not refer to any young lady, but refers to the tune. And as all tunes have their little traditional story, the traditional story of this one is that one of the MacCrimmons, after having spent 7 years at Borrowrig under his father's tuition, was considered to be a fairly competent player, was sent off to compose a pibroch. And he's supposed to have spent 3 nights in a cave without food or drink, and each night the spirit of his ancestors came to him and played a tune. And he learned a little bit of it each night. The 3rd day he came out and this was the tune. Here then is MacCrimmon's Sweetheart. The date 1746 is a very important one in the history of the bagpipe, because this date, the same year as the Battle of Culloden, saw the end of the Highland clan system. The prescription of the Highland dress, the bagpipes, the speaking of Gaelic and the wearing of tartan, which was enforced immediately after 1746, meant that the old piping colleges throughout the Highlands and Scotland had to be broken up. Up till that time, a piper was an important member of the clan, ranking fourth after the chief, and piping was a full-time occupation. The MacCrimmon College at Piobaireachd and Skye was only one of many scattered throughout the islands and the Highlands. And at these colleges, pupils would be sent from all over Scotland to learn piping in courses which would last from 7 to 11 years. And of course, they did nothing else during that period except learn to play the pipes. After 1746, these colleges, of course, were disbanded, and the pipers had to give up the playing of the instrument. There is on record the case of a piper, James Reid, who was hanged at York in 1746 solely for the crime of being a piper. The piping, of course, did not die entirely, because a number of noble souls kept the instrument going far from the ears of the governing bodies, and piping was handed down from father to son, from teacher to pupil, for the next 100 years at least. But the number of pipers playing was considerably diminished. Piping was revived again through the efforts of the British Army to enrol pipers in the Highland regiments, and they offered such inducements as being permitted to wear the kilt and an enrolling fee of something like £5 instead of the normal shilling, in order to encourage pipers to the ranks. The instrument came back again in its same form, but the music that was popular was, of course, the little music, which we'll play later on, because piobaireachd and jigs were not suitable for soldiers on the march or for hardly any other purpose connected with soldiering. Piobaireachd is still encouraged greatly in the army as solo exhibition performances, and piobaireachd is played at the officers' mess every night in the British Army, at least in the Highland regiments. The piobaireachd, the classical music, was carried on by a very few pipers, the names of whom we have pretty well established, and the number of generations between the present-day piobaireachd players and the MacCrimmons is really comparatively few also. We know that the present-day pipers were taught by men who were taught, and going back like that, it's only a matter of 5 or 6 teachers before we arrive at Ian Dhu MacCrimmon, who was the last of the MacCrimmons, who died about 1818. The next piece of piobaireachd, which I shall play myself this time, is called Macintosh's Lament, and this is representative of more or less the best of pipe music, being composed somewhere about the 17th century, the end of the 17th century. It's supposed to commemorate the death of a Macintosh, a young chieftain who was killed accidentally by a horse on his wedding day. And the lament is supposed to be for the young lady who was maid, wife and widow all on the same day. It's not entirely a regular piobaireachd in that the ground and each successive variation is not made up of 3 lines, the way nearly all piobaireachd are, and there are about 350 pieces in existence, and probably about 345 of them consist of the 3-line ground and the 3-line variations and so on. This one is a 4-line ground, 4-line variation, but it's very interesting, I think, to record this one for posterity in America, because this one will be familiar to many people listening as one of the themes of Dvorak's New World Symphony. We don't know how the similarity arises, but we gather that Dvorak, at the end of the 19th century, composing his New World Symphony, went to the colored people for early music of America, and it may be that the colored people heard this tune from the victims of the Highland clearances and passed it on, or it may simply be purely an accident. But there's a great similarity between the second presentation of the theme of Macintosh's Lament, that is the 3rd and 4th lines of each variation on ground, and the largo movement, at any rate, of Dvorak's New World Symphony. Here then is Macintosh's Lament. The little music of the bagpipes has developed considerably since its early beginnings about a century and a half ago. To begin with, of course, the army was only interested in simple marches which would keep time for the soldiers as they went along their way. But later on, the pipers became a little bit impatient with this simple type of tune, and gradually these tunes have developed until we now have a very highly developed, at least, and quite complicated kind of music called competition tunes, competition marches, strathspeys and reels. The marches, first of all, developed originally from these little simple beginnings, and we'd like to play you an example of two tunes, one an early type of march, and the other one the modern counterpart of exactly the same tune. It's about 100 years since the development of these marches began, principally due to two men, one Angus Mackay, the other Hugh Mackay, about the middle of the 19th century, working independently on the development of these competition-type tunes, as we call them nowadays. John MacLellan will play, first of all, Stumpy, which is a short two-piece march popular about a century and a half ago. And then he'll play immediately after that the Highland Wedding, which is the name given to the modern six-part march based upon the same theme. And it shows just the development that has taken place with that kind of music in these last years. And then he'll play two strathspeys, and strathspeys, of course, in the bagpipes are really stolen from the fiddle. The fiddle in Scotland is quite popular and has been, of course, with the melodies of Neil Gow and so on. And many fine fiddle strathspeys and reels have been transferred onto the bagpipes. When they're played on the pipes, sometimes you'll hear them more or less as the fiddle plays them, in which case we think that the fiddle is the better instrument to play them. But in addition to the fiddle tunes, we also have composed for the pipes tunes which are definitely bagpipes, strathspeys and reels, and wouldn't sound anything like as good if they were played on any other instrument. For the strathspeys and reels, John MacLellan will play a fiddle tune, Stirling Castle, and while it's being played you can almost imagine the fiddler bowing away at it. And he'll play immediately after that Arniston Castle, which is a bagpipe strathspey and of completely different character, although in exactly the same time. And then he'll play two reels, The Kilt Is My Delight, again a fiddle tune, and a very popular one for the mouth music. That is a kind of music which developed in Scotland when the bagpipes were suppressed, representing the bagpipe sounds with the mouth. The Kilt Is My Delight is that one, followed by Grey Bob, a reel which is again strictly a bagpipe tune. The only branch of bagpipe music now left to make this record complete is the middle music, the Piobaireachd, that is the slow airs and the jigs. In olden times, that is in the MacCrimmon era before 1746, the only pipe music, as I said, that's played was the ceolmór and the jigs. The pipers used to reckon that the jigs were good exercise for the fingers and that the piobaireachd or ceolmór was the important contribution to the world of music. Jigs are very popular nowadays with pipers, partly because of the exercise, but very largely because of the value of the music itself. There may, of course, be in addition the added interest that it gives a piper a better chance of showing his virtuosity and his technical ability on the chanter. The slow airs are in a slightly different category. It may be in the past that the piobaireachd was rather long to be played on all occasions, and sometimes just a bit of a phrase would be played from it, or it may have been that the other musicians in the clan, other than the piper, would lift a little bit of the piobaireachd and make a song from it. But anyway, what we do know is that most piobaireachd have associated with them a Highland or Gaelic song. And the song follows the tune fairly well. It, of course, changes in some ways in that the singer has a bigger range and can express himself quite differently, and he doesn't go in for variations the way the piper did. But still, it's quite recognizable, this particular song, along with this particular piobaireachd. The slow airs, in addition, were developed by original compositions of slow airs independent of piobaireachd, and I'll finish this record by playing a slow air called The Fair Maid of Barra, which is in real Highland form, but is not associated with any particular piobaireachd. Then I'll play 3 jigs. Most of them, the first 2 are old, and the third one is a very modern composition. The 3 jigs are John Patterson's Mare, an old tune, The Stool of Repentance, another very old one, and finally The Hen's March, which is only about a year old.